Las Vegas, Nevada, entertainment capital of the world, and Sin City. I was there last week for the AC/DC concert. Great show, great experience. I'll love to show video of that, but I don't want the copyright claims, and this channel is about railroading. Let's get back to it. After the fun and long weekend, I wanted to de-stress, get away from the crowds, and no better place for that than Death Valley National Park. At Furnace Creek, California, inside Death Valley National Park, there's a museum. The biggest piece of equipment they have on display is this. It's the Death Valley Railroad number 2. It is a 280 oil-burning locomotive. I find the locomotive itself and the history of the railroad it served interesting. Let's talk about it. Death Valley, California, the hottest and driest place in the nation. The last place you would expect to see a railroad. Especially a 3-foot narrow gauge railroad similar to the Denver Rio Grande in Colorado. In 1914, the mining operations at Little C Mine was declining, and the Pacific Coast Borax Company wanted to expand around the area outside of Furnace Creek and Ryan, California. They already owned the Borax and Daggett Railroad. That was a 3-foot narrow gauge, so it was easy to move locomotives and equipment from one railroad to the next. And this was the first Death Valley Railroad number 2, a used hostler off the other line, Francis. The Death Valley Railroad cut off from the Tuna Pond Tidewater near Death Valley Junction and ran to Ryan, California, and also over to Coolibite and Duvere just outside the national park boundary. The Death Valley Railroad ordered a pair of 280s from Baldwin. What's interesting about those two locomotives is they're built as oil burners, and I don't know of any other 280 narrow gauge oil burning locomotives. If anybody does, please comment down below. And then number 2 Francis was sold off to another railroad in Nevada and eventually scrapped. By the 1920s, it was evident that there was not enough freight traffic to keep the railroad profitable long term. They wanted to bring in more tourism. They did have some passenger equipment on the Death Valley Railroad. It was not enough, so they decided to purchase a self-propelled motor car, hoping to cut down on cost, and that was not enough. The last regularly scheduled train was 1930, and by 1931 they ceased operations. They moved the equipment to another railroad in New Mexico and left that for abandonment. Just like most of the other railroads, that one dieselized in the 1950s, and Death Valley Railroad number 2 was out of work. Lucky for us, it was not scrapped. It made its way back to Death Valley to its permanent home at Furnace Creek. Let's take a closer look at this locomotive. One of the more interesting things about this locomotive is the front pilot. The standard coupler position is a little lower, and it's in the middle, obviously, so it can move around narrow gauge equipment on narrow gauge track. That's what it was made for. Those two pockets, it can move the coupler to those pockets, and that can line up with couplers on standard gauge equipment on dual gauge track. Number 2 weighs 110,000 pounds. 98,000 pounds of that is on its 42-inch tall drivers. Has a driver wheelbase of 13 feet 6 inches and a locomotive wheelbase of 20 feet 10 inches. Has Waltert's valve gear and a 120 square foot firebox. The boiler is rated 170 psi, and the locomotive puts out 22,294 pounds of tractive effort. The tender dry weighs 80,000 pounds and has a capacity of 4,000 gallons of water and 1,800 gallons of oil. Death Valley, California is one of the hottest places in the world. How do you run a railroad? It's quite simple, actually. They would run number 2 early in the morning with supplies and water out to Ryan, and then wait until late evening and make a return trip back to Death Valley Junction with the Borax, especially during the summer months. You do not want to run that during the mid-afternoon. It'll be just way too hot. Both locomotives were designed for the 20-degree curves and the 1.5% grades of the Death Valley Railroad. You can find number 1 on display in New Mexico, and number 2 in Death Valley National Park. The motor car made the trip out to New Mexico as well, and that did survive and might have a cameo in a future video. That was Death Valley number 2, a unique little narrow gauge locomotive. It's at the Borax Museum at Furnace Creek, less than a mile from the Death Valley Visitor Center. It's worth checking out next time you're in Death Valley. Thanks for watching. Until next time.